All right, let's get started. So hi everyone, my name is Yi, and I'm going to be talking about how to build build embedded fintech stacks that your users actually want. So just to introduce myself, my name is Yi Liu. I am the general manager for Gusto Embedded. I'm from the Bay Area. I have two boys, ages 7 and 4. We love to go surfing in the Santa Cruz area. And fun fact, I've actually gone surfing in Texas before, about an hour and a half outside of Austin. There's a city called Waco, and there's a wave pool there. So my family and I actually went there and did some surfing about a year ago, and had a blast. All right, so let's talk about embedded fintech. It's all the buzz these days, and for good reason. It's an exciting technology. Now, more than ever, there's a lot of embedded fintech companies out there, everything from embedded payments to payroll to CRMs, accounting, insurance, you name it. And you can add all of those financial products now to your software stack to build an all-in-one solution. And there's so many more features than ever before. Successful implementation can also lead to really great benefits. So there was actually a study that was done with Accenture and Plaid that showed that 88% of companies that added fintech products to their software stack saw increased customer engagement. And 85% of those said it helped them acquire new customers. And the reason behind all of that, well, that's pretty easy to understand. Users don't want to have multiple screens, multiple logins, different integrations. What they really want is everything all in one place, especially when it comes to money movement and their back office workflows. And with today's embedded fintech technology, you can make that easily happen all the time. The more that your platform has everything that your customers need to do their jobs and to do it all in one place, the stickier it becomes as well. So these benefits are great, right? Like embedded fintech is pretty obvious. We want to have all of these things all in one place. But are there downsides? And the answer is yes, there can be downsides. So you might know this meme from It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, but in terms of what we're talking about here, this is really about, sometimes you maybe add too many things and none of it all fits together. Having one solution all in one place is great, but as you layer on more products, it becomes really top-heavy, and the experience can get really disjointed, especially if you're working with third parties. Many companies actually also see it as a race to add everything all in one place as soon as possible, as fast as possible. And that can lead to some really tricky downsides, because the bar for user experience, at least what your customers expect, that's actually much higher than it was in the past. So how do you avoid creating that Frankenstein of a beast, the bloated tech stacks that nobody wants? Well, I'm here to talk a little bit about what the lessons learned that we have in building Gusto and Gusto Embedded in the last few years. All right, but before I do that, let's talk a little bit about Gusto. So lots of you may know Gusto as a payroll provider, and that's what we do. That's what we built about 9 years ago when I first joined as the head of payroll product and operations. But we actually do a lot more than that now. We do payroll, benefits, HR, compliance, everything that small businesses need to serve and operate their teams. We work with over 300,000 small businesses across the US in all different industries, and last year we surpassed over $500 million in revenue. And we're constantly expanding our product offerings and our capabilities. So as an example, we recently launched Gusto Global that allows employers to pay employees internationally. We've also launched AI products to help customers improve their workflows. And most recently, in the last few years, we launched Gusto Embedded, which is an infrastructure platform product. So Gusto Embedded, what is it? Well, let's take a step back and think about payroll. Payroll is something that every small business, or actually every business, needs across all industries. But building payroll can actually be really tough. There's regulation complexity, there's technology complexity, there's compliance complexity. And so when you put all that together, adding payroll to your own software stack can be really, really complicated. And so what we did is we actually launched Gusto Embedded that enables any third-party developer to add payroll and enable payroll for their end customers. And so with our flexible APIs, you can actually create customized payroll experience for your small business or anybody that chooses to offer payroll to. And we take care of all of that back-end infrastructure, compliance, operations behind the scenes for you. So TLDR, you can offer your own payroll product powered by Gusto. And so today we actually work with dozens of companies, everything from small vertical SaaS startups to fintechs to major banks. One of the partners that we actually work with today is Chase Payment Solutions, which I know there's a lot of Chase folks in the house. So we partner with Chase to offer Chase Payment Solution customers ability to access not only their payment information and tooling inside the Chase platform, but also now payroll. And today, I'll share 3 key lessons learned about our journey in building Gusto Embedded and what it was like to work with our partners. So lesson number 1, don't burn trust before your product is off the ground. So this sounds pretty obvious, but there is this innate pressure for when you start all tech companies with your investors, with your board, to just grow as quickly as possible. You want to expand your total addressable market, you want to ship as quickly as possible, and you want to get as many adoptees as possible. And that's the water we all swim in. But like the fish that asks, what the hell is water? It's easy to forget just how much the need for growth influences your day-to-day decisions. And so even early on with Gusto, we felt that pressure to grow. But what I really appreciated from our founders and from our board was really, hey, let's make sure we don't compromise our user experience. And this is really, really critical when you're talking about money movement. When you're thinking about how money goes from point A to point B, getting that right from the get-go is really, really important before you think about growth. And so this is what Gusto did as well. In the beginning, this is what Gusto looked like. And for those who have been following Gusto, we actually used to be called Zen Payroll up until 2015. And our founders, they iterated with the name, they also iterated the product. And the customer focus was actually only in the very beginning, it was only customers that were in the state of California that had no prior payroll history. So that was actually a pretty limited set. But we started out with about 200 of those customers. We talked to them, we figured out what worked for them, and then we actually were able to convert them and have a lot of exciting feedback from them. And it was performing so well that people were asking, hey, why don't you want to expand into more states? Well, what we did was we actually wanted to be intentional and get everything right, and especially when it comes to money movement. So we wanted to make sure that for payroll, that people were paid on time, that the tax filings worked, and that the tax payments went to the IRS in a timely manner. And once we got all of those things right, then we added on more features, like a self-serve employee onboarding flow, or that you got paid email that employees all love today. And then once we got all of that right in California, then we expanded into additional states. And then after that, we expanded into additional products like health insurance, 401k, workers' comp, you name it. So the lesson here is that you got to make sure that you get your end-to-end experience right for your initial set of customers. It can be pretty narrow at first, but making sure that the end-to-end money movement experience works well is so critical when you think about embedding fintech. Fintech companies can't go with that, move fast and break things, because when things break, people don't get paid, and that's really, really critical. You're in the business of payroll, and so people's livelihoods are at stake, and there's really no margin for error here. And so this sounds obvious now, not compromising the customer experience, not making sure that people got paid, that money movement worked, but there was actually real tension here in the beginning as we built out Gusto. And so the focus here is that we really wanted to make sure we didn't destroy customer trust from the get-go. And that leads me to lesson learned number 2. So resist the bolt-on product and user UX temptation. And what I mean by that is that, just like we feel the pressure to grow, to ship quickly, we also know that in order to become an all-in-one platform, you have to add as many features as possible. And so a quick shortcut to do that is to bring on as many third parties as possible, and just do these bolt-on solutions so that you can say, hey, I have all of this feature list under the sun. Well, the challenge is the temptation to just add these bolt-on new products in the name of getting to market quickly is that it just becomes disjointed. And I know Stripe has made things very simple with that 7 lines of code, but unfortunately it doesn't really work in payroll. It's a lot more complicated than that, and I think it probably applies to other parts of fintech as well. And so we see this roadblock quite a bit with partners we work with, and partners that consider not only embedded payroll, but other fintech products. You want to ensure that your embedded fintech stack looks seamless to your users, and that it's not just a jumping off point for all sorts of other brands and products. So, and this is not just to say that, in all cases, you got to, all these white labeled, launch this within a week solution is always bad. But with the downsides, we have seen this firsthand because that bar for user experience is just so high now. And the thing about it is that it's not just, the value prop is not just all-in-one solution, it's about how it all fits in together to customize for your end customers. And so think through what that really looks like before you add on the Swiss Army knife of features. So I'll give a little bit of an example. There's a leader in the HR tech space with over 20,000 customers. It's not Gusto, but I won't name names. And they actually opted for a white labeled payroll solution. That was a bolt-on experience. It didn't look and feel like the rest of their product, but they said, hey, payroll's complicated, let me just add it. And this led to a disconnect in the user experience and a lot of, not only in the product itself, but also in the customer experience, in the tax notices they were getting, because users were confused, like, hey, who's actually serving my payroll product? Or who's actually helping me run payroll? And so after investing in significant time and resources, in evaluation, in training, and marketing efforts, this HR tech company actually decided to discontinue that payroll product. And instead, what they did was they acquired a payroll product so that they can bring that capability in-house, because they realized that, hey, getting that product seamless experience is so critical to making sure that you don't burn your users' trust. And the reason I share this example is that there's a lot of embedded fintech players out there that offer that bolt-on solution and saying you can go live within a week. And that might be great, but a lot of it, you have to think about the compromises of the user experience. And so Gusto actually faced this problem as well. We saw this roadblock several times. Example is actually time tracking. So time tracking and payroll actually go pretty well together. What do you do with all of your hours that you work? Well, you put it into payroll, right? So having a good time tracking solution in addition to payroll makes a lot of sense. And so in the early days, Gusto was thinking about, well, how do we add time tracking to our payroll solution? But there are specific industries with time tracking where it's very, very complicated. Like if you have a hospitality industry you're serving, restaurants, retail, there's actually a lot of complexities, like with tip pooling or with really complicated overtime regulations for specific industries. And so what Gusto did was think through, well, how do I offer that whole wide range of capabilities to my wide range of customers? If we build it in-house, it would take a really, really long time. And if we outsource it or do a bolt-on solution, the user experience could be disjointed. And so we actually opted for a hybrid solution. We did first-party and third-party. With our first-party solution, which you see on the left, we natively built this basic time and attendance product so that small businesses with simple needs would get that seamless, consistent UX. It didn't serve the whole swath of customers that we ultimately served later on, but it did reach a small subset, and it made their lives much more simple. And so this is actually like the desk-based employees. We didn't actually go into mobile. And then for the other subset where we didn't serve well with the first party, we did adopt a third-party strategy. We decided to invest in our APIs. We integrated with best-in-class time tracking solutions for more of that industry-specific needs, like retail, restaurants, hospitality. The third-party integration solution, while not seamless, did serve a lot of the needs, provided flexibilities, and allowed customers to bring on their already existing time tracking solutions. And that allow us to go deep as well as go wide. And this wasn't perfect. There's definitely not an integrated experience like that first party, but it gave us some flexibility of offerings to our customers. All right, so what you really want to do is avoid those compromises that lead to bad user experience or an incomplete product offering. especially because that also leads to bad edge cases that your service teams will have to then figure out later on. I just showed that slide of the Swiss Army knife of bolt-on offerings, and so how do you think about how do you avoid all of this? And this is where these 5 key architecture decisions come into play. So this is actually based on Gusto's experiences with building Gusto Embedded. We didn't have this 3 years ago, but these are hard lessons learned as we partnered with not only partners with Chase Payment Solutions, but also the smaller vertical SaaS partners. And through it all, this is our now tried and true playbook of what we do to help our partners figure out how to build that seamless experience and make sure that they're not just adding a bolt-on solution for payroll. So inside look here. And the 5 decisions are, decision number 1, which system is the source of truth? It could be your system, it could be Gusto, and that really depends on how much information you're already storing in your own databases and in your own product. Decision number 2, how will you keep that data in sync? How will you think about the bidirectional syncing as well as error handling? Decision number 3, how will you handle customer communications? So once that information is syncing properly, if it gets updated, how will you make sure that your customers actually know about it? And who actually owns that customer communication flow? Decision number 4, how will you handle operations? So not just by notifying customers of what's happening in the app, but operationally, what does it mean when things are, they need to talk to someone specifically about risk, billing, or CX? And then lastly, how will users discover embedded products in your application? So how do they find out that you just added a new embedded fintech product into your all-in-one solution? How do they onboard? What are the usage analytics that you have to really build in to make sure that you're tracking all of that properly? So bear with me now. I'm actually going to go off on a deep dive into all 5 of these decisions. And the reason why I'm doing that is because I think this actually applies not only to embedded payroll, but to all embedded fintech companies out there. Whether you're offering a loan solution or insurance product, these are critical decisions to have with your partner to make sure that you have a seamless experience as you integrate these embedded fintech solutions. OK, so deep dive into decision number 1. Which backend is the source of truth? Picking a source of truth sounds easy, right? Well, with payroll, it's actually a lot more complicated. There's actually 3 types of data that we think about when we work with payroll. The first is demographics data, second is payroll input, and third is payroll output. So demographic data, or the company or employee information, that's pretty critical. In addition, we also have payroll demographic information, like what is the state tax registration ID, or the tax rates that they have. And all of that information has to be critical and accurate right before a company runs payroll. And because of that, we actually recommend that Gusto is the source of truth. Because if you don't have that information accurate and you run payroll, that can lead to really bad downstream effects like tax notices, penalties, and interests. Payroll inputs, the second type of category, that's information like hours worked, overtime pay, tips, bonuses. And a lot of that is actually dependent on the type of industry you're in. And so Gusto systems may not actually be designed to store at that level of granularity. I'll give an example. So we work with a vertical SaaS company that specializes in building all-in-one solutions for laundromats. Well, as a laundromat, you may actually pay your employees by the pound of laundry that's folded and not by the hours worked. And so with that, we expect the vertical SaaS company to store that type of information because we don't have that level of granularity in Gusto. And then lastly, the third type of data is output data. So this is after all of that information gets calculated, what is the output in terms of net pay and in terms of tax information that you can then send to the IRS and other agencies. And this is core to annual compliance. So for example, you need to have correct withholdings, and you need to make sure that the tax payments are calculated and sent correctly. And if changes happen, then Gusto systems actually do a lot of reconciliation and automation to fix all of those things. Like we will send automated amendments or make payments on your behalf. And because Gusto handles all of that on the back end, we recommend storing that as the source of truth, as Gusto as the source of truth. So we work with partners to categorize all of this information. Now, the table can be very, very long here. For them to we work with them to map out that source of truth. And it may seem rote or it may seem tedious to put together, but once you have that, it actually surfaces a lot of underlying assumptions as well as gaps in understanding if something is off between the two parties. The other thing to remember is that data can actually be stored in multiple surfaces. And so if there's places where you write data in, with your CX team or with your UI team, within your UI, then you got to make sure that all that information is reconciled properly. Let's see. So the next decision is related, and is once you have all of that source of truth, once you have that source of truth determined, the second decision is how will you keep that data in sync? With all else being equal, we typically recommend standing up independent services like payroll webhooks and payroll data reconciliation logic. In the case of payroll, Gusto will push webhook event notifications when changes happen. But we also suggest periodically checking for changes using event APIs and that corresponding logic. So if your application is the source of truth, then the webhook event should trigger a check in your systems and your logs, and you got to make sure that then the update was generated properly on your side. And if Gusto is the source of truth, then the webhook should trigger a fetch for that data that you just updated, and then making sure that then the triggers the next flow in the workflow. So as an example, when a company has been approved by Gusto's KYC processes, the Know Your Customer process, then we actually send that notification, and that triggers the partner to then call the next workflow, which is then the ability to run payroll. And then in terms of error handling, as I mentioned, your UI components, your CX teams, they will all be updating information, and so you got to make sure that the data gets reconciled and that the sources of truth is kept up to date at all times. But in addition to adding webhooks and data reconciliation processes, we also recommend that you map the user experience and user actions and corresponding API calls in order to visualize what that data flow looks like for the key jobs to be done. So this is a diagram of Gusto, our standard run payroll flow. It's actually much bigger than that, but this is as much as the screenshot can afford. But essentially, we show the key API calls, both on the customer side, on your client side, your server side, and then also Gusto's backend. And then the back and forth arrows really show the reconciliation that you have to do in order to be able to handle error handling. All right, decision number 3. So how will you handle customer communications? So it's critical, obviously, to get the source of truth and the data reconciliation right. But what's more important is then how do you surface that information to your customers in a way that's not disjointed and that also serves the right information from the right systems. The customer communications front is actually not an if, but a how. And in the case of payroll, it's actually very, very important. We have, I think, over 200 different types of notifications that we tell our customers. Everything from, hey, you're pretty close to your payroll deadline, you got to run payroll by 4 o'clock, to insufficient funds, you don't have enough money in your bank account. And some of those are really critical and required, like the insufficient funds, and some of them are nice to have, like, hey, how many notifications do you want to send before the payroll deadline? So we recommend that you map out the user flows in these diagrams and the key communication points. You can do it from the user perspective, or you can do it from the data perspective, which is what is shown here. And that way you can see all the key points of communication, the triggers, and the messages. This should also include communications from the customers that are onboarding. Even though they might not be considered customers in your database, these are leads that you got to make sure you understand how is that data going to trigger important events later on. So for example, with Gusto, if you're onboarding and you don't have all the right information, you're actually blocked from running payroll. But users may not know that. And so how do you make sure that that information flows is surfaced in your system, both by the embedded fintech partner as well as by your own systems? And thinking about, well, what about the operations and go-to-market teams that may be able to help address those blockages when the customer's onboarding? So the lesson learned here is that really we got to make sure you over-communicate. More communication will generally create a better user experience. But the trade-off is that, yeah, there's going to be more work and more thinking behind, well, how does this all work? And we really learned this also the hard way. We had very simple emails to begin with, and then we realized that it's actually a lot more complex when you're dealing with a partner who then has to communicate with their end customers. The other thing to note is that when you want to talk to your embedded fintech partner to figure out how much of that customer communication is necessary for your MVP versus future phases. And what Gusto Embedded does is we actually offer those notification APIs that I mentioned that has in the payload a title, a message, and the content description so that you can decide whether you want to pass that information along as an email, as a text message, or in-app notifications, depending on how you like to communicate with your end customers. So customer communications is also not just what happens within the product, but also outside of it in the servicing side. We have a phrase at Gusto that is, it's not just payroll is not just a product, it's product plus service. And so that leads me to decision number 4, which is how will you handle operations? And by operations, we mean things like risk, billing, and customer experience. And let me tell you a little bit about risk. So with payroll, it's actually pretty complicated. Payroll payments rely on the ACH, Automated Clearinghouse System. And it actually takes 4 days for payments to clear. So if you want your employees paid on a Friday, you have to make sure that there's enough funds on a Monday so that you can run payroll. And that's a pretty long time, especially for small businesses where cash flow can be a problem. So in the industry now, actually best practices is to offer 2-day or next-day payroll. And that's the expectation that a lot of customers have. But that can come with a lot of payroll risk. Faster payroll speeds often mean that risk of loss to you because you're actually fronting that money rather than waiting for the 4 days to clear from the customer's bank accounts. And so if you think about this type of risk, what you really have to do is also make sure that there's internal tooling, that there's dashboards to monitor payroll movement speeds, and also losses. And that can also lead to, if you have different payroll faster speed options, also complexities in how you do pricing and packaging. And so my point is that it's not that you need to understand the ACH system, but that when you think about financial products, they carry financial risk. And you need to make sure you understand your responsibilities when you add embedded fintech products to your software stack. And so that can really mean making sure your CX teams are ready to support, that you have the proper guardrails, and you have the right operational monitoring systems in place. And so we work with our partners quite heavily to make sure that they have built that into their playbooks. And so this also means that there are certain things that maybe sit outside of the product itself, and that you may be more reliant on your embedded payroll or your embedded fintech provider for. For embedded payroll, what we do is we actually take on all the tax liabilities or all the tax notices that comes in and make sure that we handle some of those CX operations with the IRS and with state and local agencies. For other fintech companies, that could mean, for embedded credit products, maybe it's loan servicing or claims processing for embedded insurance products. And it can be tempting to say, hey, the embedded partner should do all of that. And yes, some partners do all of that. But we saw from the example earlier with that bolt-on solution is that it can be, it can seem like it's out of the box, but that still could have negative ramifications on the customer experience and how all your customers perceive the all-in-one solution. All right, and that leads me to also decision number 5. So how will your embedded fintech products be discovered? So finally, you have to decide, well, how will your users discover your embedded fintech product offering, and how will they navigate those products to get to this new application that you have? And so we recommend making your embedded fintech product easily findable in the UI, which means making sure that it's part of the dashboard, that it's part of the sidebar navigation, and then also encouraging you to track those customer behaviors so you know exactly where they are in the user flow. It's important to have a fully thought out product-led growth strategy before you fully launch that product. There's also, on the onboarding side, there's a lot of information, as I mentioned earlier, that customers have to have in order to be able to onboard properly. And so being able to track where they are in the onboarding steps, identify drop-offs, and then making sure that they're treated as leads so that your onboarding specialist or your sales team can reach out in the proper manner. Okay, so we're done with the deep dive of the 5 architectural decisions. The reason, again, why we went through the deep dive is because these are real decisions we've had to make with all of our partners, whether they're small companies or large banks. And the reason is because we have to get these right in order for your product to be built properly in the back end. And that's the antidote, in my opinion, to the bolt-on solution that we mentioned in roadblock number 2. All right, so at this point, you're probably wondering, well, is all this effort worth it? It's kind of a lot of work to add an embedded fintech product to your solution. Does this really drive a lot more usage and adoption? And the answer is yes. We have learned firsthand that it does drive a lot of adoption and usage if you can get all of this right, because that actually means you get to go to market much faster with a lot more products and a lot more benefits for your end customers. But it's not just the product and engineering side alone that can make that happen. You have to have a coherent go-to-market story as well, which is why this leads to the third and final roadblock and lesson learned. And so this is avoid the if you build it, they will come trap, which I think a lot of us know about, and I think we've experienced firsthand at Gusto as well. A lot of software developer teams will think about, if you build it, it's going to be awesome, you're going to solve a lot of pain points, and we'll get adoption right away. And they do this big launch, but then nothing happens because it was only thought through on the product side and engineering side. What you really want to think about, though, is what does it mean holistically? And the other fallacy we've seen is that the product team or the engineering team will evaluate a partner based on just their API docs or how good their platform is or how easy it is their APIs are. And that's all really, really critical, and that's foundation to how you pick a fintech partner. But you also want to think about, is this a partner who can really help us sell the solution? Do they understand the new market that we're entering? And do they understand the customer pain points in that market? So before making an embedded fintech product more widely available, I want you to think about all those pain points that we talked about earlier. And then how do you make sure that customers know about it and find out the product, why the product is so good? And that means really making sure how do you think about the discoverability and the launch solution. And so the business side and the product side have to come and be very aligned in when you think about this launching an embedded fintech product. Chances are your embedded fintech partner will know how to sell this better than you do, but you got to do the evaluation yourself. So in the past, we've had a few early stage vertical SaaS partners that have done an incredible job building out their embedded fintech their embedded payroll product. They built out, it was very integrated, it was very easily seamless in terms of how it fit in with their overall solution. But once launched, nothing happened. There was crickets. And we were like, wait, what's happening? And it's because they didn't really do the work to educate their customers on how to find the solution, and they didn't educate their go-to-market teams on how to sell and service it. Some, for example, didn't even have a sales and marketing team ready to support. Or they didn't realize, hey, you had actually switched from other payroll providers like ADP, and that can actually take quite a bit of time, and you needed the onboarding specialist support. Another example is a partner that have thought about the marketing side, and they did a bunch of lead gen strategies to promote their solution. So for things like marketing campaigns or industry conferences. But then they didn't actually ensure their sales team was ready to support it and ready to talk about payroll, and they didn't have the necessary content for their sales team. Or they actually, their product was only targeted for a subset of smaller customers as their V1, but they launched it to a much broader audience, and then they weren't able to actually address those needs of the broader set of customers. And so that led to wait lists of leads that they couldn't support and unnecessary swirls in the go-to-market cycle. So the lesson here is that you do need a holistic go-to-market plan with product, sales, and engineering all on board. All right, so let me tell you about a partner who actually did this really well, FreshBooks. FreshBooks is a top-tier accounting platform out of Toronto, and they're a great example of a closely aligned product and go-to-market launch story. FreshBooks, they offer accounting software for small businesses, accountants, and they wanted to add payroll. And so we worked with them for over a year to really think through how do you build that payroll solution so it looks and feels and is customized to their needs, while at the same time making sure that we provide the infrastructure for compliance to be able to support them on the back end. FreshBooks then began marketing in-app 4 months before their launch because they wanted to take advantage of the payroll seasonality, and there's a spike season in payroll in January. They worked closely with Gusto to generate buzz. We made an announcement actually at Money 2020 last year. Their executive team was all on board. We had a lot of press release articles. And so when the GA launch actually came in January, there was a lot of excitement and people knew a lot about it. And their sales team was actually able to support it as well. And then we also worked with their product team to make sure there was in-product hooks to drive that product-led upsell motions. In fact, actually, within 30 minutes of their dark launch release, a customer had already found the product and signed up. So pretty amazing experience with the FreshBooks launch. And we also worked with the FreshBooks go-to-market teams to figure out not only the first 30 days of launch, but actually built out a full year playbook of growth strategies. And so everything from the always-on motions that we do for email drip campaigns to seasonal ad hoc programs to match the seasonality of payroll to optimizing the purchase journey and funnel enhancements. And this is, obviously this is not the exact copy of what we did with them, but there was a full-on go-to-market playbook with them. We also then worked with their product and data teams to understand and analyze their customer funnel, everything from top of the funnel to customers that are stuck in the late stages of the funnel process. And as a result, they're actually off and running. So they're hitting all the milestones that we focus on the Gusto embedded side, which is the first 100 customers within the first few months of launch and getting to that 1,000 customers by the end of the year. We're seeing a similar approach also yield similar results with our current customer base. And so everything from Chase Payment Solutions to Vergaro, which is a vertical SaaS company for spas and salons, to Lattice, which is an HRIS solution. All right, I'm getting towards the end here, so a few more slides. So taking a step back, as we saw, there's just more and more software apps out there that offer embedded fintech. And that makes it really, really easy to add payments, payroll, credit products, loans, insurance, you name it, to your own software stack. And you can do it via these third parties. And that's awesome because that means you can get to a better product much faster. But the key is really to customize. You know your customers the best. You know what makes them tick, what's going to happen, what they really need from an all-in-one solution. And just because you offer a bunch of things doesn't actually mean that they think that it's all valuable. What you want to do is make sure that stitches together nicely. And that way, you can actually build that custom experience for your end customers that meet their needs. So going back to the laundromat example, right? The vertical SaaS company for laundromats. They know that laundromats actually pay their employees a little bit differently. So then they were able to customize that payroll solution to meet the laundromat's needs. And that's the value that you can really bring to your customers and why customers will adopt that all-in-one solution. It's not just about that Swiss Army knife. It's about how it all fits together. Cool. So to wrap up, how do you actually build embedded fintech stacks that your customers actually want? Well, 3 lessons. First, don't burn trust before your product's off the ground. This means really making sure you get that money movement right, that money moves from point A to point B seamlessly, that you think about all the edge cases before you expand into more customer segments, more geographies, et cetera. Second, resist the bolt-on product and UX temptation. Just because you can add it to your software stack in a week doesn't mean that it's going to be a great experience for your customers, nor would they want to adopt it. And so there's actually a lot of complexity when you add embedded fintech because of all the things that go under the hood that we discussed. Those 5 architectural decisions are really critical, like data syncing, source of truth, customer communications. And we actually learned that the hard way. And then lastly, avoid the build it, they will come trap. You got to make sure that go-to-market teams and your product teams are aligned to create that wow, not just the wow during launch, but through the next year to come. So these are the hard lessons learned that we've seen in building Gusto and in building Gusto Embedded. So I hope that these are some helpful tips as you think about adding embedded fintech products into your all-in-one solution in the future. All right, that is the end of the talk. So thank you, everyone. Thank you. Cool. Yeah, thanks, everyone. Very, very excited to be here. I want to thank the conference organizers, as well as all the Gusties that are in the audience. So raise your hand if you're from Gusto. We're happy to chat about embedded fintech and payroll in general. All those folks, awesome. I also want to share that we are hiring, so engineers, product managers, technical solutions, solutions architects, definitely, if you're interested, come talk to us. And then lastly, I want to invite everyone here to a happy hour that we're hosting later tonight from 8 to 10. Please talk to us. We're excited to have you. And I think there's a few minutes left, so I'm happy to answer questions. Oh, yes.
I was just wondering if you could talk a little bit more about the commercial model between you and the vertical SaaS platform and how you think about that and maybe how it evolved as you started working with more customers.
Yeah, good question. So I'll just repeat it. How do we think about the commercial model working with partners as we think about building out the embedded payroll product and how it evolved over the years? So a lot of it, there were definitely different considerations we had in the very beginning, and we iterated. There are things like platform fees, right? Like just charged by the API usage. But that's not really aligned with what our partners want. What we really want is like a win-win solution for at the end of the day, we all want to drive adoption. And so a lot of what we do on the commercial side is make it so that it's a wholesale model for growth for the end customer adoption. And so what that means is we don't get paid until there's end customer adoption of embedded payroll. So if Chase Payroll, has, let's call it like 1 million users, right? Then we actually get a cut of that, and that's how it kind of works. Is really it's a scaled factor with how customers grow in adoption. And there's some implementation fees in the beginning because it does take a while to kind of figure out those architectural decisions to help customers kind of get launched. But at the end of the day, the real commercial side is about the customer adoption and usage fees. Other questions? Yeah.
I'm curious about whether or not you, and I think you maybe gave one of these examples, but I don't know if FreshBooks was, kind of in this build versus buy decision-making process, because I think I work with a lot of earlier stage companies that are sort of in that decision-making set. And I guess, maybe it's through these questions that you bring up, but are those the questions where a company decides, like, we think this is something we can build our own versus going through the embedded process? Or like, what have you seen as they deliberate between those two choices?
Yeah, so we usually have that process in the sales process, and then the architecture decisions will kind of come later on. By then, they have already decided, hey, they want to partner with us. Now it's like all about kind of fleshing out those details. But in the early stages, it is a hard question. We saw some partners actually decide they went with a partner, and then they decided to actually do it in-house because they just weren't able to get that experience that they need. So a lot of partners we work with, as they think about that build versus buy, is the trade-offs and the expertise that they want. Like, do they really want to be payroll compliance experts? Do they really want to go through and learn all about payroll risk and be able to understand like the ACH system? And initially we had thought let's give everybody the risk controls and they can play around with the knobs however they want. But then what we learned is nobody wants to own risk. Nobody wants to become risk experts. And so then it became a lot of a lot of partners who don't really want to do that upfront lift, then partnering becomes a lot easier. Because then they can say, well, Gusto is the experts. I trust Gusto that they'll move money around for me, that they'll handle the risk, and that they'll be able to really think through the compliance expert side. But it also comes down to what's the time that they want to spend on investing in and building versus buying. And so that's also the big lift is like, if they build, it may actually take them years. And that's what we saw like a lot of partners, a lot of companies do, versus if they partner, they can get up to speed, get up and running in months. Yeah.
I just had a question about payment rails. You mentioned a lot about ACH, associated risk, timing, like a lot of considerations there. How have you seen adoption of like FedNow or RTP, and/or have you seen that sort of adoption?
Yeah, the payroll industry is definitely still, I would say, a little bit slower on the adoption curve there. We work a lot still on ACH and those rails. And so that is something that I think we're innovating internally. And once we get it right for Gusto.com, we'll then make it available for embedded payroll partners. But right now, it's a little bit still in the early stages, I would say. It's still very much, ACH is the standard, unfortunately. At least in the US. I think internationally, it's become a lot easier. All right, last question, yeah, okay, go for it.
Going off that, how did you think about like bank partner selection and like kind of underlying vendors as you built the embedded solution? Obviously, you mentioned partnering with JP Morgan. I imagine that might look different than some of the vertical SaaS players that don't really bring their own banks.
Yeah.
How do you think about that strategically?
Thanks. And the question was, how do you think about the banking partners that we work with and the underlying payment rails? So that was the nice thing about building Gusto embedded on top of Gusto, is that Gusto has already thought about a lot of that for our 300,000 small businesses. And we actually did look at a number of different payments solutions. We partner with a few different banks, like Chase is one of them. We actually also partner with SVB. And the nice thing was that because Gusto was already pretty at scale, when the SVB crisis hit, we actually were not impacted. We were able to switch over pretty quickly to our other payroll payment rails. And so when we built out Gusto embedded on top of Gusto, we were then able just to leverage all that underlying infrastructure. So a lot of what we did was really making the APIs that were available internally more externally facing, but still leveraging like everything that Gusto has built under the hood in the last 10, 12 years. All right, I think I'm at time. So thank you again, everyone. Really excited. And yeah, come join us for a happy hour later.